welcome to another episode of Just Onside. It's been about a week, so Ois, how are you, sir?
I'm doing good, thank you. It has been a while, so yeah, looking forward to the episode, but I'm doing good. How about yourself?
I'm not too bad at all, not too bad at all. And as you can sort of see, we've got Mr. George Watson, our Burnley man. He was here a few months ago, very excited about being back in the Premier League, very optimistic as well, George. So how are you?
Good, thank you. The optimism might have turned a bit into delusion by now, but see.
Save it, my friend, save it. We're going to talk about Burnley later on. All right, but before we start, let me just request from the viewers, please smash a like. If you're watching this, smash a like right now, right at this moment. I'm talking about you, yeah? Smash a like. Subscribe if you haven't. Share with your friends. We've got a Twitter account as well. It's somewhere here, the Twitter handle. So please join. It's a really good account. So right, we're going to kick off with what happened last week. I think Friday was when the news broke about Everton. Something about profit and sustainability. I'm not too sure. I'm not an expert in these matters, but the upshot is they've had 10 points knocked off their account. So OS, as the solicitor of this group, can you explain to laymen like me exactly what has happened to Everton?
Non-practicing solicitor, that is, Ayub. You got to be
He was
careful.
struck off, viewers.
Don't be putting my business out on Front Street, Ayub. No, all good. Yeah, it was quite the breaking news, wasn't it? Back end of last week. We knew this was coming. For those of us who follow the game, and in terms of some of the noises that we're hearing, that Everton were about to be, let's say, the first domino to fall in terms of the potential penalties being faced because of breaking the Premier League's profit and sustainability rules. So we kind of knew that it was imminent. We also kind of thought that a lot of we talked about the fact that there hadn't been any kind of Premier League manager sackings yet and what have you, and clubs at the bottom that were struggling. There was some talk that there were some owners at least waiting to see what the outcome of this Everton debacle would be, and here we are with a 10-point deduction. So I'll quickly just frame up what essentially happened without boring everyone with all the little details. But in a nutshell, as we've spoken about before, you in an episode that we did on FFP, one aspect is financial fair play, which is the UEFA's governing rules regarding clubs being sustainable or financially sustainable. And there is the Premier League's version, which is known as the profit and sustainability rules, as you mentioned. And in that scenario, essentially, clubs can effectively have losses of 105 million across a 3-year period. So the review period is always across this kind of 3-year rolling period. And that's essentially what the clubs have to be. That's the threshold. You're allowed to lose essentially, on average, £35 million a year. Now, Everton across a 3-year period lost close to, if you look at their accounts, around 380 million pounds. So on the face of it, just in terms of operating profit and loss, they were comfortably above the threshold. What you then have is what's called these kind of exemptions. So because of COVID and a few other factors, you are allowed to kind of add in some conditions and losses to essentially meet your FFP case. And there's two types of losses in a nutshell. There's crystallized losses and there's uncrystallized losses. I won't go into the details too much, but it is important just to understand in terms of kind of crystallized losses, that kind of essentially what that kind of looks at is these kind of COVID impact and what have you, in terms of loss of income, player trading losses, etc. Again, all boring details, but in a nutshell, what Everton were arguing is that they had about 90 million of crystallized losses and 103 million of uncrystallized losses. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of context to those just so that it's clear. And this is all done with a view to them arguing that our losses were X, but there were some clear reasons for why we reached those losses, and therefore that's why we fell foul of FFP, or should I say, the profit and sustainability rules. But for example, if you look at it in a bit more detail with regards to those player trading losses, what they argue, for example, is that they had 88 million of player trading COVID losses. Yeah. Now, if you look at that in context, the next club, or the next highest in terms of losses, was Aston Villa with 13 million. So what Everton were arguing is that in terms of the player trading losses that it had because of COVID and other such impacts, they had about 88 million. Villa had 13. None of the other Premier League clubs had any. So it just gives you a little bit of context to what Everton were potentially, some may say, cooking the books, as they say. They had a lot of other analysis that they did and submitted in terms of player impairment and the fact that, again, the market value. Some of you may have read the story regarding the Richarlison value with Spurs. They argued that Spurs took advantage of their situation and lowballed them essentially into paying 60 million. You might argue that was probably about 50 million too high.
Absolutely, yeah.
But what they argue is that his normal valuation would have been about 80 million, and because of their situation and what have you, and COVID and other such situations, Spurs only had to pay 60 million. That didn't go down too well with Spurs, apparently, who are now making them pay, because I think they have to pay 10 million for Dele Alli. Anyway, the story goes on and on. So like I said, in a nutshell, after all of those kind of exemptions and what have you, Everton still fell foul of about 20-25 million, even if you accept some of those, what I would say, questionable losses and conditions that they brought in because of COVID and other such impacts. Therefore, the Premier League suggested that they were in breach of one count of a breach of a profit and sustainability rules. That then went to an independent commission. And it's not some willy-nilly independent commission. This is a proper kind of committee full of experts in the area. You have to have X amount of minimum legal experience, accountancy experience, etc. So this is not just three men sitting around debating it for half an hour. It's proper deliberation. Everton have been working with the Premier League for the best part of a year. This was a 3-year period up to 21-22 season. So there's been a bit of time with a bit of back and forth, a lot of reports that when Everton was signing players in the transfer window, they were actually having to go through the Premier League to see if they could sign players. I think Abdullah Doucouré was one where the Premier League suggested that this might mean that they fall foul of some of their kind of profit and sustainability rules. They still went ahead and what have you. So they were actually having to go through the Premier League to get kind of final say and confirmation and approval that they could actually go ahead and sign some players. And in the last few transfer windows, they have scaled it back for obvious reasons, knowing that this ruling was coming. But in the end, the commission ruled that a 10-point, A, that they were guilty of a financial breach, and B, that a 10-point deduction seemed appropriate. There's been a lot of reaction to that 10-point deduction, and no doubt that there's some ramifications to that, because there's some other major players, major clubs in the Premier League that will come onto that are also facing, let's say, some scrutiny, and City especially having had 105 or 115 Premier League charges being brought against them. So that's where we are. It leaves them joint bottom of the Premier League table, just above Burnley on goal difference. But of course, this is probably, it's the harshest penalty given for profit and sustainability in the Premier League in its history. So it's quite the occasion in terms of quite the remarkable incident for bad reasons if you're an Everton fan. George, you must have been celebrating though.
Yeah, definitely. I leapt out of my chair when I read the news, although I sank back down into my chair in dismay when I realised that we were actually still below them after getting 10 points knocked off. I think it's part unlucky, and it's called, I think the term that they're using now is creative accounting for it as well, which, and the figures you've said, they speak for themselves. They're clearly taking the mick with it a bit, aren't they? Like, you'd understand if it was a United, a City, and they've got these high-valued players, but it's Everton. They're always been a mid-table, borderline relegation scrapping club. But I did a bit of reading as well, and they've just been taking stupid risks as well. So within the budget for one of the seasons, they budgeted themselves finishing 6th. They finished 16th that season. So it's never going to be sustainable when you're spending money assuming you're going to finish sixth, and that cash never comes in. And it's unlucky timing as well, because Ancelotti came in 3-4 years ago now, 2019, I think. And he spent big. It's no secret he spent big. He had the likes of James Rodriguez coming in, and then COVID hit just after that. So I think it's just a bit unlucky timing, I'd guess.
Why is it just? I mean, it's something that we spoke offline as well. I mean, I don't know whether OS you've got more of an insight into this, but it's Everton have been punished, but surely the Premier League have to have some accountability. Surely, I mean, it's if you're saying to me that Everton, when they were doing these transfers, that they were having to consult, then really somebody's not obviously paid attention, because if they're consulting the Premier League, they would have obviously said, look, you cannot do this.
I think the consultation with the Premier League only came in the last few transfer windows. Remember, this was a 3-year running period up until the 21-22 season. So that means we're about a year and a half removed after that. So we've had the entire 22-23 season, and then half of, let's say, the 23-24 season as we enter into December. So it's only in the last few windows, let's say this past summer. So Premier League already have been deliberating on this for the best part of 9 months. It's just that obviously Everton still have to continue to operate during that time, having saved themselves from relegation by the skin of their teeth last season. So during those last few windows, when they knew a judgment was coming, that they were also just making sure. I think what you've also got here, Ayub, similar perhaps to the ever-breaking story at Chelsea as well, is this idea that I think what Everton were trying to show is, hey, look, we know you're about to pass judgment on these 3 years. And yes, it's those 3 years that are in question. But look at us trying to really make amends here and trying to really do things the right way in these last few windows, with a view to perhaps mitigating that penalty. Clearly, it didn't work. But I think that's what it was. So I actually take your point more, when you think about more the kind of the old fit and proper person test about owners and what have you. It's funny, I saw on Twitter someone mentioned that Everton fans kicking up a stink about the same fans that were kicking up a stink that our club's not run well by the people at the top are now shocked and amazed that their club's not run well by the people at the top. So there is a little bit of kind of a gallow humor coming from the back of this story. But yeah, I mean, it's quite an incredible story. What do you think, Ayub? Do you think 10 points is a bit harsh?
I'd like to know what the criteria is. This is the thing. You've obviously talked about that the 3 gentlemen who have made the decision are experts in their field. I'd like some more detail as to why they think 10 points is a sufficient penalty. Is there a financial penalty as well, in addition to a points deduction?
There is, because certain leeches of clubs like Leeds United Football Club,
which is what I'm going to lead on to,
and Burnley have come calling talk about kicking a man/team when they're down. But I think that'll be the one. No, I think in terms of financial penalty, but that's the whole point of you. They've reported losses. They ain't got no money, so never mind no financial losses. But just a couple of quick little corrections. You mentioned 3 men. No, it's a big panel. It's 15 to 20 experts, and there's a panel that hears the case, and then it goes to independent commission, who then rules that there's a 10-point deduction in this case, and then the appeal, which I think has to be submitted by Everton within 7 days. So they've pretty much got to do it now. I think it's coming up to 7 days. That then is heard by another panel. So it's part of the same panel, but it's not the same people, if that makes sense. That panel is fully reserved to hear the appeals only. Thereafterwards, there is no other recourse. So there's no recourse to go to the kind of court of arbitration for sport and what have you. No, that is the final say and what have you. So that's where you have it. And just to, again, put into context what Everton were claiming, what they claimed in terms of COVID losses in the entire league, there were 1.3 million of COVID losses, or total COVID impact claimed by the clubs. 1.3 million. Everton argued they accounted for 228. So that just the next highest was Arsenal, to be fair, 122. Well, actually, it was Spurs who actually reported a profit. But anyway, the point is, as George mentioned, it didn't take long. Creative accounting is a soft way to put it, I guess. Yeah, indeed.
But it is important. I think we, as football fans, we should get an idea as to why it's 10 points. I think because it obviously there's a precedence set. So therefore, as football supporters, we've got to be aware as to why there is 10 points, because obviously there are question marks over Manchester City. I'm not exactly sure what they are being accused of. I don't know whether it's anything similar to what Everton have, but this is where the consistency, or football fans will expect consistency. If it's happened to Everton, then really, if any other club commits the same offence as Everton, then I would expect to see a similar penalty. But as I said, my only concern at the moment is I'm intrigued to find out how they've arrived at this 10-point decision, this deduction of 10 points. In terms of where this puts Everton, obviously they're in the bottom three now. Do you think this is fatal for Everton, or do you think that the way that they're playing in recent weeks, that Big Dyche almost is this is what he revels in? So, seeing as Burnley are right at the bottom of the table, George, I'll let you answer. Do you feel, even though obviously they're still above you, but do you feel a little bit more optimistic that there's more clubs in the mix, or do you think that Everton have got enough about them to escape?
100% I'm more optimistic, and I think the fear for Everton and the other clubs down at the bottom will be what this does to the mentality of the other clubs. Because before this came out, there was Luton, Sheffield United, Burnley, Bournemouth, and then seemingly everybody else is now magically safe, much to my disagreement. But yeah, but if I'm down there and I then see another club that's within reaching distance, for me, I'm fighting for 2 spots above relegation. It's going to G me up for the next game. I'm going to want to go after that next result instead of being, because it's no surprise that Burnley are down on the luck at the minute. But now I'm wondering what that is going to do to the mentality of it. And again, notoriously, Everton do not fare that well when Calvert-Lewin picks up his annual 6, 7, 8 week injury, and it might be next game. It could be in a few games' time, but he's notoriously injury prone, and I'm also wondering if they're going to spend anything in January. Are they going to be too scared to do it? Are they going to be allowed to do it? I'm not sure.
I'll be amazed if they do spend, considering the position that they're in. So, Ois, what do you think? I mean, do you think this will galvanise Everton? I mean, I think prior to this deduction, Dyche was doing a really, really good job. They'd actually hit a bit of form. Do you? I mean, I from my point of view, I think this is absolutely. I mean, I think Dyche sort of perversely will love this situation. It's sort of backs against 100%. The wall. So he'll revel in this. So what do you think? Do you think they'll still feel quite confident that they've got enough about them to escape?
I think so. And the reason is very simply, with respect to George, they'll be thinking, what are we up against? I mean, Everton have won 4 games. Luton, Sheffield United and Burnley between them have won 3. I mean, in the end, they'll think this is A, early enough. B, if they submit an appeal, they've always got a chance to get that down to maybe 6 points. Let's say there's a growing consensus that's True. Perhaps what they'll settle on. You mentioned a few podcasts ago, and it's all right, Ayub. I mean, it takes 1 win at the bottom, even for Burnley's sake. 1 win gets them out of the relegation, depending on results. So it's Everton have shown they can win games, certain games. They've looked poor in some others, but they can win certain games. The others haven't shown that, and they'll feel there's enough. I was going to say tripe, but I want to be respectful to George. But they'll think there's enough poor teams in the league, and I'd probably put Fulham in there. Maybe Forest. Fulham I've been speaking about for quite some time. But I really think they're struggling at the moment. I just think Everton will think they've got enough. Now, the other point is, and George mentioned it, is in terms of spending, will Everton be able to spend? Probably not. But then the question is, how much are the others actually going to improve as well in those windows? So if the first 12 games are anything to go by, Everton are not one of the worst 3 teams in the league. I think we'd all agree with that for the time being. But of course, you've got to prove that over the course of a season. Will it galvanise the club? It should. I think you run into more challenges. Let's say if they had to have a player sale or what have you, and then players are leaving and all the rest of it, and some of the other bigger clubs come calling, and you lose some of your more important players, however few that you may have. I think they should be fine, just because there's too many games to go. But what it probably needs is some of the others to start putting a little bit of pressure on I mean, still they're only 2 points off Luton, even with this 10-point deduction. So I'd still think they're probably favourites to stay up, and I think that'd be fair to say. I'm sure the bookies have them still more. I know that I checked the odds shortly afterwards, but they're still favourites to stay up. I think from what I saw. So I wouldn't disagree with that, to be honest with you.
I agree. They'll stay up
think-
with ease.
I think it's a bit of a backhanded compliment to them, but I think with all this going on, they're a bit fortunate that it's happened this season, because any other season with a 10-point deduction, they would have gone down 1,000%. But this season, with how bad the teams have been, Burnley included, I think that they should count themselves not lucky, but fortunate that it has happened this season.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you're right, George.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you mentioned earlier about Manchester City, and I just wanted to come back to it. Everton got hit with a 10-point deduction, and I think the main thing that you were struggling with is why 10 points. And there's some who speculate that there's obviously been a lot of talk about independent regulators coming into the Premier League and what have you. And this is somehow the Premier League's kind of last-ditch attempt to show that we can regulate ourselves, or we can be tough on clubs that are not following the rules and what have you. Do I think some of this is a precursor to some of the big boys coming? Well, everyone's watching. This is what everyone's watching out for. How are they going to deal with the developing story at Chelsea in terms of potentially payments being made from Abramovich's regime, let's say, to whether it's player agents or associates of Antonio Conte or whatever it may be, by using other companies, third-party companies and what have you. We will see. Chelsea also self-reported themselves, so there's a lot of information out there. So it'll be interesting to see. In terms of the Man City one, however, I just wanted to quickly pass comment. That's 115 Premier League charges. Everton had 1. So I'm pretty confident. I've always felt this, although there's many who are skeptical whether or not when the big boys come armed with lawyers, the best lawyers that money can buy and what have you, and how the Premier League deal with that. I'm pretty confident in saying that if Man City are found guilty, it will be at the bare minimum a relegation, and maybe not just to the Championship. It could well be multiple tiers. I'm pretty confident. I don't even think that's breaking news, to be honest with you. It will be that severe. And don't forget, there's no statute of limitations when it comes to the Premier League's profit and sustainability rules. So it's not one that Man City can forever kick down the road and think that, similar to the UEFA case, that they'll be at some point, they'll be able to win on a technicality. This case will be heard. And I'm, again, not saying that they are guilty. They'll have their day in court. But if they are proven guilty, it's quite obvious that it'll be relegation, at least to the Championship.
I think they're lining up to it. Whenever I hear about what's just happened with Everton and then City get thrown into the equation, it just throws me back to what happened to Juventus back in 2006. It has almost shades of that to it. They got fined, they got stripped of titles, and they got relegated. And I think that probably will be the case here.
That was exactly the team that I was going to quote, because it has happened. I mean, it's not beyond the realms of possibility for it to happen to Manchester City. I mean, I'd be amazed. It would be the most amazing story of the English Premier League if that happened. But enough of Everton.
I was just going to say, just whilst you were saying that, I just thought to myself, you've got a perfect line ready as and when, if it does happen, you'll be like, Yaya Touré's curse has come again. Or something.
He's gone. He's lifted it. He's in a happy place now. Right. So it is a nice little segue. Well, I say nice little segue, perhaps for George. It's not nice, but obviously Everton being in the relegation mix, which is exactly where Burnley are, right at the foot of the table. Now, I remember when we did the first show, George, I started off the show today by saying you were quite optimistic, and you were. I must confess, I was quite optimistic for Burnley as well. I think that they were exceptional last season, but this season's been quite tough. From a Burnley perspective, talk me through exactly what's been happening, how it started, what's gone wrong. You keep talking to me that you've been unlucky, but explain to our viewers where Burnley stand at this moment, apart from at the foot of the table.
Don't get me wrong, we have been poor. There's absolutely no getting away from that. I think there's an element of stubbornness gone into it. like we spoke about Company and Bielsa, maybe not having a plan B, sticking at your plan A until it works. I think we've bought that many players. It's almost shades of Forest last season because it's taking a while for the penny to drop with a few players. I think it is now gradually. Sander Berge, notable mention. He's been fantastic our last couple of games. Unlucky, yes, with injuries. Manuel Benson, very, very prominent for us last season. Lyle Foster looked like a real handful up top for us. I think he had, prior to his absence, he had 4 goal involvements in his last 5 games or something like that. So it was proving to be a bit of a handful. And I hate to go back to VAR as well, but I felt hard done to in the Forest game because we scored to make it 2-1 when it was 1 apiece. Sander Berge had a ridiculous handball given against him. So that's 2 points there that we've missed. Bournemouth, VAR didn't even bother checking the handball again against Sander Berge when their player had hold of his shirt. He jumps, his arm goes up in the air, and he handballs it and stops him heading it in at the back post in the last minute to draw. And that doesn't just give us an extra point, it also takes 2 points off Bournemouth. So with that being said, and in terms of with Premier League spectators, it's a very fickle business. If those VAR things don't happen and we suddenly get 3 points, we're joint 16th with Bournemouth, and everyone's like, well, Burnley aren't actually doing that bad. So yeah, we've got some favourable fixtures coming up. I'm a bit more optimistic now. We should have Ekdal back, who is one of our main centre halves, and I'd like to think that he's learnt his lesson with James Trafford, and we'll put Muric back in net.
I've heard. I mean, we've talked often. I mean, this is to the viewers. We've talked often, myself and George. And George, you've mentioned before you've got some fixtures you're looking forward to.
Yeah,
I think there was a
The
3-game fixture
the
list.
last
where
round of fixtures I look forward to, we lost all 3. So
so it's a tough league. I mean, it's a league that I've always sort of said it's without mercy. This is the best league or the most demanding, high quality league in the world. And the gulf between the Championship and the Premier League is absolutely monstrous. Now, on Company, now you've talked about it, and we've talked quite often about this, about coaches just having one way of playing. If it works, great. But if it's not working, then obviously there's major problems. Now, Company, do you think he's safe?
Oh, 100%. 100%. I would, because we did it with Dash the first season we came up as well. We went back down with him and then won the league the next season straight after. I think with the recruitment we've got, the young lads we've got in, the talent we've got in, I think we have the squad and with Company capable of going up again straight away next season. Personally, I don't think it'll get to that. I think, like as I said, the penny's starting to drop, but we'll see.
I was just going to say, just a question, George. You mentioned about Daesh in terms of getting relegated, coming back up, and what have you. Just with the ownership group, I was going to say new ownership group, but they've obviously been in there for quite some time now. Do you think that they would be patient with him? Let's say they get to the game week 25, 26, let's say 3 points adrift or what have you. Do you think that at that point they'll be okay to kind of stand pat, or do you think you could see it? I'm not saying it'll be deserved, but do you think you could see it where this ownership group, even though they obviously like Company, made a bold appointment at the time anyway, do you think that they would just see it through and say, listen, if we're going to get relegated, we're getting relegated with Vincent Company at the helm?
I'd like to think that they would they'd stick to their guns and stay with him. The Daesh sacking was brutal and it was unexpected, but when Company came in, they did turn around and say, look, this is a 2-3 year project, and then we've gone up a year into the project. So I'd like to see them back up what they said in terms of the 2-3 year project and give him that time, because he was going to get that time originally anyway. But as we know, it's a funny old game, is football, and decisions can be made overnight. So I'd like to think that they back him. I'd back him, but who knows?
I was just going to say, I think they would. I hate to say it, but I think if it came to it, I think they'd do it. If it came to it begrudgingly, there's just so much emphasis on staying and such a premium of staying in the Premier League that I think when you speak about the 3-year project, I think what they meant was 3 years as in stave off relegation, stabilise yourself, and then become a mid-table club, as you once Bournemouth or wanted Bournemouth to be like. But anyway, we won't go down that rabbit hole. But yeah, no, I think I worry that would be how they would see it. Again, we've still not seen a managerial casualty, and Vincent Kompany. Listen, I don't see that being one. I agree. I think if they could see it through, it might be one of those situations where if they become adrift or get cast adrift after these next set of fixtures, to your point, there are some winnable games. No doubt Burnley's opposition also see it like that as well. But yeah, if they get cast adrift early, they probably would have to make the call sooner rather than later before it just becomes too much for a potential new manager to come in. Equally, if they stay within touching distance going into, let's say, the last 12 games, I wonder whether or not there comes a little bit of pressure then, because that's when owners are really tested, because your entire club, the fortunes of it, you're talking just not just money, but just jobs and all sorts. That's when it really becomes evident, those last 10 to 12 games. It must be a horrible feeling, when you're just in around that relegation zone. You've got plenty of experience as well. But I can understand why owners in that sense just lose their kind of nerve a little bit when trying to. I mean, even Leeds did it desperately with Sam Allardyce when it looked forlorn, only giving him a number of games, first game being at the Etihad, if I remember correctly. So it just, yeah, I just wonder. For now, I think he's got pretty much 100% fan approval, but let's see how that develops.
I mean, that's the key, though, isn't it, George? I think at the moment, I mean, Kompany is still I think most of the fans, yourself included, are still very much in support of Kompany. In a sense, maybe the thought is, if there is a realistic expectation that they will go down, who's the best man to bring them back up? It's probably Kompany. So I'd be absolutely amazed if they got rid of Kompany, because it just wouldn't make sense to me. Because I think with Leeds it was a different story, because I think the club had really, Premier League is where we expect to be, and it just, there was too much riding on us staying in the Premier League. So in a sense, desperate decisions were made. I think with Burnley, I'm not too sure. I mean, in terms of realistic expectations, I'm sure Burnley would want to stay in the Premier League, but if you ask them to be absolutely honest, they'd have to admit that they're probably part of the three sides most likely to go down, especially now. I think maybe at the start of the season there may have been a degree of optimism, but certainly now, I think if you ask, in fact, George, I'll ask you, hand on heart, do you see Burnley finishing outside of the bottom three come the end of the season?
At the minute, I do, but I know how
he's off again. He's off again.
I know how outrageous it sounds, but for me, Sheffield United and Luton, they're playing a style of football which we did when we first came up. It's damage limitation football. When you go a goal down, it's really not likely that you're going to get anything from the game. But I think with us, we're trying to play the right football. Don't get me wrong, it's not really worked because purely, I think, the amount of new players that we've got. I think a couple of games back, we had 2 players starting out of the 11 that went up in the last game of the season. Yeah, I think once the penny drops, I think we will start getting results going our way. But it's just when it does happen.
I think that's the problem, because I think having watched Leeds for the last 2 seasons, there's all sorts of, well, this needs to happen, that needs to happen. The problem is it seldom does. Ultimately, you need quality. I'm not sure whether, especially with some of the injuries that you have, if you just have not got the quality. I think in terms of the 3 that came up, you're certainly the better side. I mean, I've watched in the flesh Luton, and they were horrific, I've got to say. But that was away from home. But they only got beat 1-0. So at least when they are losing, it's Go on, Amish. You're desperate to get in.
No, I was going to say you're absolutely right. That mention about the 1-0, right? We were there watching the game against Manchester United. I was following the Arsenal-Burnley game, worried.
I was following the Leeds game.
Yeah, very worried when Brownhill equalised, fortunately, or unfortunately for George at least. Saliba obviously went up the other end. But look, I mean, you're right. The thing with Luton is minus 12 goal difference compared to Burnley minus 21, right? And we know Burnley having a few kind of thrashings, noticeably kind of that home defeat to Spurs and one or two others. Luton scrap, it's not, you may say it's not great to watch and what have you, but we did see them, Are you in the flesh, and they dug in fairly well, I thought, at Old Trafford. I mean, they were second best, let's not get it twisted, and they're going to be second best in a lot of games, but they scrap, they fight, and they create some set piece situations. You've got Carlton Morris up front forcing a good save from Onana. The thing with Luton, what we've seen is enough of a sample size, is that they've got something. Now, I agree with George. I think they're going about it in a sense like the old Burnley would, in terms of keeping it tight, trying not to be out of games, trying to maybe take the games into the last 10 minutes, 11 minutes, 12 minutes, and now with injury time, and just being with it. They got a set piece, if you remember, Ayub, when it was 1-0 from about 22 yards. We were all looking at one another thinking, here we go, 22 yards out, centre of goal. This could be interesting. But Burnley, the worry I have for them is, like, I mean, I'm a nervous Arsenal fan at the best of times, but even I thought Arsenal probably got enough time to turn this around. I didn't realize they'd turn it around so quickly. And that's the worry. It's when you start losing games and you've not quite got the talent, perhaps not the kind of mentality or the mindset of having been there before, certain leaders and what have you, a lot of player turnover, as George mentioned. The worry is that you get caught a little adrift. And what I mean by adrift is maybe 6 points. 6 points could be an eternity, and that's when you have that knock-on effect of thinking, bloody hell, that's like 3 results away with our goal difference, and that would be the worry. I still think it's okay for the time being, because again, you're a win away from safety, and it's so tight there now, especially with Everton being thrown into the mix. But I worry for them. I think right now the ownership. You asked the question, how would the ownership have seen it? I think when you get promoted the way Burnley did, they would have thought, well, we're the third worst team in the league, kind of, if that makes sense, when we came up, because we won the championship and what have you, and here we go. We're better than Sheffield United. We're better than Luton. So we're looking for somebody to take one spot, essentially. I think that's how they would have come in. And rightly so. I would come in like that as well. I think there was not much talk. I think George said earlier that he had him, I think, when he came on the podcast last time, 14th, 15th, I think it was. And that's still within reach. But when you're getting teams like a Forest or a Palace who'll just pick up the odd win, you're really only scrapping against a few teams. And Burnley haven't, at least for me, shown enough metal over 95, 96 minutes that they can keep clean sheets. They scored the least amount of goals, second worst in terms of goals conceded. It's not a good recipe, that. So they've not quite shown enough, whereas Luton have at least scrapped, where you think, could they amass enough, few little draws here, the odd sneaky little win? They were 3 minutes away from beating Liverpool. You just wonder whether or not they'll, again, I still think Luton will go down. It's that kind of mentality that I think you need a little bit more when you're perhaps bereft of talent, let's say, at the bottom.
What do you reckon, George?
Yeah.
Are you? Is there a team, 3 teams that you are better than in the Premier League at this moment in time?
I'm praying there is. I'm not a religious man, but I'm definitely praying there is. I think on the face of it, I still believe we are a better side than Bournemouth are. Don't get me wrong, pay them their dues. That game against Newcastle was absolute quality for them, and it was an awful timing for us, given that we lost to Arsenal. But I think some of the clubs down there, I think they've had a bit of their easier games. But I mean, Bournemouth, Sheffield United next weekend is absolutely huge.
Yeah.
But I just want to sort of reiterate where my probably delusional confidence is coming from in your eyes. Our next 6 games, we're at home to West Ham, home to Sheffield United, away at Wolves, away at Brighton, home to Everton, away at Fulham. Now, I'm looking at that thinking, if we can get something against West Ham, not necessarily a victory, just a draw to get some confidence, I think there could be 9 points in that list. And as we said,
9 points, George.
I told.
You've got
I'll
4
round up, I
currently.
told-
So you've got 4 currently out of 12.
I told Ayub that I would go on record and put my money where my mouth is. So
Well, you
there
have
it
now.
is. There
So,
it is.
so that's 9 points
And-
out of a possible 18, yeah.
Yes, I'm hoping. Maybe we might tag on Liverpool just to make it out of 7.
That's still 9 points out of 7 games.
9
then.
points out of 7 games. But that's sort of where my head's at. Don't get me wrong. If we carry on as we have been doing and we play against West Ham, we will lose. Something definitely needs to change. I'm hoping that the international break has come at a decent time for us to sort of regroup, realise where we're going wrong. We've had a couple of weeks. We've got some key injuries back in and amongst training now. Ekdal is a massive positive for us because he was our main player when Howard Bellis got injured last season. He was out for 2-3 months, and then he even struggled to get back then, and he was one of our better players last season. But yeah, it's. I think these next couple of games, it's pretty much do or die, and then I will join the relegation bandwagon if it's still 2 losses from the next 2 games.
I think Ayub's got you going down. Simple as.
Oh yeah. But to be fair,
I hope-
Ayub's changed his mind that many times. He said top 10 at one point, I think. So.
No, I mean, I do hope. I mean, it's something that you've alluded to in terms of the way that you play, and it's refreshing because Sheffield United and Luton, archetypal sort of sides that come up. It's a battle. It's not pretty. And in a sense, maybe I suppose it's playing with the resources that you have. But I do like Company's approach. It's very refreshing. There is, I think, enough quality. It's just, it's those key moments because, as I said, it's a merciless league. Your mistakes invariably get punished. In the Championship, you may get away with it. You may concede 1, 2, but you're going to score 4. Not in this league. So I hope so. I mean, I hope it's Bournemouth instead of Burnley. That will give me enormous delight. But you're absolutely right. The next run of fixtures are going to be absolutely crucial. Absolutely crucial. And you're right about the West Ham game because I think, in a sense, you need something. You need a catalyst to kickstart maybe a decent run. As to
Definitely.
9 points in 18, you're off your head, man. This is the Premier League. It's,
True.
But
Stoop to 7, maybe.
6 points. Yeah, 6.7 points may be realistic, but something needs to drastically change. I think Company needs to really realise that. Look, if he wants to stay up, then he's got to do something slightly different. He's got to have, if not Plan B, certainly sort of Plan A.1. Because he can't just carry on playing exactly the way that he is.
Yeah, I think he's also thinking about the numbers game, right? He knows that if he compromises on certain principles and standards, there's also a risk associated with that, right? Too many confusing messages to the.
That's the one.
Yeah, it's too many confusing messages to the players. He wants this. I think he also understands that actually we're not that far off, and I just mean that from a maths perspective. He's thinking, well, there's enough clubs down there where it's going to click at some point, as George said, and hopefully they can pick them way out of it. So he's kind of playing that long game, not looking to confuse the message too much, keeping it simple, keeping the players on side. The problem is, if you keep taking a few beatings, you can share as many good messages as possible in training, in kind of analysis sessions and what have you. It's not good for morale. I mean, look at Leeds when they were taking those thrashings at you before Bielsa finally was shown the door. I mean, it had to be done simply because you can't sustain letting in 3s and 4s every single week for the sake of 6 or 7 games in a row. It's just your confidence is just going to take a battering. You remember Ellen Road was a really difficult place during that little run of time because goals were just inevitable. So much nervousness in the air. I agree that I think Company, we want to see him succeed again. For me, it's just because he's a giant in the Premier League in terms of iconic. This match that you mentioned, George, Bournemouth, Sheffield United, huge game. I mean, if Bournemouth win that, I mean, you really need that game to be a draw, to be honest.
Well, let's be fair. It's if Bournemouth win it and we win as well, it's not impossible. But like you,
it's the second part of that equation that I struggle with, George.
You referenced it earlier with Everton. You said it's not. It's still early in the season. We're still a third of the way through the season, so that's the only. I've said this to you multiple times. I think that is the only saving grace for me, which is why I'm a bit confident. If it was halfway through the season, then I'd be a lot more worried. But you've still got over 20 odd games to go. So, and just also picking up on your point about Company as a player, I also think that is kind of working against him as a manager. You've got Luton and Sheffield United. They have accepted that they are going to be the second best team in a lot of the games that they're playing. Whereas I think that Company's winners mentality, he refuses to accept that he's the second best team on that pitch. And I think sometimes that goes against him.
But it's going against him. It's certainly going against him in the Premier League.
Yeah, it's a
but
fair
he refuses to be bullied. Like he's that much of a the winner's mentality. He refuses to be bullied, and it shows in the play. He likes to press aggressively and keep hold of the ball, even against teams that are clearly better at it than him.
Yeah, it'll just be. I mean, he might be thinking, to your point, George, that we'll continue as is. We've got a run of games now, and let's see where we get. Where we will have a little bit more of the ball, and we will have a little bit more of the play, especially in front of home fans who'll still back the team and support the team. And they just need a little bit, don't they, in terms of just a little bit of luck or whatever it may be. But I think it's getting to that critical point where certain things will turn. Like you're obviously a diehard Burnley fan. You've noted and observed a few things where there could be some improvement. No doubt ownership's also taking a lot of, there's a lot of scrutiny. I don't think they will accept being relegated. I genuinely don't, because they weren't the third best team coming up from the Championship. They were the best team coming up from the Championship at a time when the other two teams, for the first time in a long time, where both clubs you felt were absolute cast iron guarantees to go down. It's not always been the case that where you feel like, yes, normally, invariably, the three clubs that come up are favourites to go down. Yeah, that's standard. But this time, with Luton being such a romantic story and Sheffield United, you felt there's two spots, probably just because of where those clubs are in their kind of evolution. And Burnley, having had Premier League pedigree, the owners would have looked at that and thought, we need to find one. We need to find one club, essentially, that's worse than us. And I think that's how you have to look at it, just because of the riches on offer in staying in the Premier League. And they would have looked at Wolves, and they would have looked at Bournemouth and Forest, and no doubt other clubs as well. Everton has survived by the skin of their teeth. So I think they will look at these next 6 games, and I would not be surprised that if the next 6 games don't go so well, that unfortunately there might just be a managerial change.
Also worth noting, they've spent over £100 million in the summer as well, so they've put quite a lot into it. It's not like Luton, where they've spent I don't know how much, 15-20 million pounds, and like Ayub says, it's almost like a parachute back down to the Championship, and then they can really give it a go. They've invested to stay, haven't they?
Yeah. So finally, George, where do you reckon you'll finish come the end of the season?
Well, not 14th, as I said a few weeks back. I'll stick to my guns, and I'll have to go. I'll go 17th.
That's good enough.
It's good enough.
Yeah, that's good enough. When you're in there, when you're in the dogfight, 17th is a fantastic place to finish. And on that note, optimism returns. Thank you so much, George. We'll have you back on again, I'm sure. Because
after those 6 games, are you?
Yeah. We probably will do, actually, because it will be nice just to recap after the 6 games. So thank you so much, George. Always fantastic to have you. Always a pleasure, and thank you for the insight to our viewers and to me about this Everton financial transaction, whatever it's called.
Just very quickly, what are your thoughts? Leeds United obviously preparing a lawsuit against Everton Football Club for the fact that obviously they benefited from that kind of those losses and what have you, and stayed up at Leeds' expense. I just thought it was because you were crap, but obviously they seem to argue that it was because Everton. It was because Everton were cheating the rules. What do you make of it? Are you?
I must confess, so I'm I'm indifferent to it. I mean, if obviously as a club, if we were to receive the money or even part of the money. That's fantastic for the football club. But I'm in a good space at the moment with Leeds United, so I'm not too bothered. I'm enjoying life in the Championship. It's lovely, George.
It
Join
is,
us.
it is.
It's wonderful.
Could be doing the old switcheroo again at the end of the season.
So I'm delighted. So as I said, if we get a little bit of money, absolutely fantastic. If we don't, it doesn't really matter. We're in a good space.
It's not going in your bank account, is it?
It's not. All right then. Well, on that note, folks, thank you as always for watching. Hopefully you've enjoyed the show. We'll be back again towards the end of the week, doing a little bit of a Premier League preview. Thankfully, by then the international games will be over and done with. I am absolutely sick to the teeth with international breaks, but we've only got a few more days, viewers, so just be patient. All right, so on that note, look after yourself and stay on side.